It is my great privilege to introduce our guest speaker for tonight's webinar, Colleen Miniuk. Colleen's journey is nothing short of inspiring. She is a self-proclaimed corporate America escapee. She made a remarkable transition from a 10-year career in project management at Intel Corporation to become a full-time outdoor photographer, writer, publisher, instructor, and motivational speaker. Her passion for the great outdoors is infectious, and she has dedicated her life to inspiring and helping others connect with nature. She is originally from Ohio, Arkansas, and Illinois. She now resides in Chandler, Arizona, on the ancestral homelands of the Hohokam. Her path to photography began in 2001 during an introduction to photography class at Chandler Gilbert Community College, initially serving as an outlet from her corporate life. So what started as a career escape soon transformed into a full career. Her work has graced the pages of publications including National Geographic calendars, Arizona highways. Her acclaimed guidebooks such as Wild in Arizona, Photographing Arizona's Wildflowers have empowered photographers and nature enthusiasts alike. Her connection to Acadia National Park is strong after having served as an artist in residence 3 times, which led her to authoring the award-winning guidebook, Photographing Acadia National Park. In addition to her photography, she is passionate about education and leads photography workshops for organizations like the Arizona Highways Photography Workshops and the Nature Conservancy. When she is not behind the camera or teaching, Colleen enjoys a full life of adventure, from camping and stand-up paddleboarding to adult ballet lessons, painting, and savoring life's simple pleasures. So with that, Colleen, I am looking forward to hearing your perspective on photography tonight.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to all at Singh-Ray for hosting this event and for bringing us all together to celebrate the splendor of the change in season. And thanks to everybody who's online right now. Thanks to those who are listening to the recording. I appreciate you spending your time with us to hear about Autumn's palette, photographing Acadia's beauty through Singh-Ray's filters, through your own lens. I am absolutely so excited to share my love and joy of photographing this magical national park. And I hope through the presentation that you too find your own love and your own joy photographing there, whether you've just come back from there or you've never been there or you've been there a million times like I have. Hopefully this will inspire you to get out anywhere in our beautiful lands and to celebrate the change in season. So today, though, I'm going to focus on Acadia National Park. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the park, just to get some logistical things out there so you can plan your trip properly. I'm going to talk about several of my favorite locations to experience fall colors. I can't cover all of them, so I wish I could. If I could, we'd be here till December and then we'd miss the fall colors. So I'm going to focus on the best places to find fall color within the park. I'm going to talk a little bit about what equipment to use and to bring. I'll show you a summary of equipment, a recommended gear list at the end of the presentation. And as I talk about the different locations, I am going to give you some tips for approaching your subjects in a variety of different lighting conditions, using different filters, using different approaches. And again, whether you're headed to Acadia or maybe somewhere else, all of this should hopefully inspire you to get out to enjoy the season, the change in season. So with that, I had no idea where Acadia was, where I really hadn't even paid attention to where Maine was until my first artist in residency, but it's on the opposite side of the country from Arizona, where I live. Maine is the easternmost state in America. We may think it's the most northern state, but actually it's not. It's 6 behind, let's see if I can get this right. It's behind Washington State, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota. And it's only 6 by 2 degrees. So it's up there. And so, weather is pretty different than somewhere, say, like in Arizona. They actually have a fall. Acadia is actually located, let me get my annotate tool here. Acadia is located mid-coast. They call it down east. Portland, Maine is one of the main towns. That's one of the places that you can fly into. Bangor is another opportunity to fly in. It's another larger city. Portland is about a 3.5 hour drive, depending on how fast you drive. And Bangor is about an hour and 15, hour and a half to Bar Harbor. And so when there is also, when I'll talk about, I'll zoom in a little bit. Well, I'll do that now. Let's do that now. Let me go to the next slide. Clear this. There we go. There we go. There is another airport just on the outskirts. It's called the Bar Harbor Airport, right kind of out in this area, which is a little bit closer. Smaller airlines like Cape Air and JetBlue fly in there. You'll just want to figure out what your connections are and what makes sense for you. I fly in both to Portland and Bangor, depending on the year and depending on the time of year. So they all kind of work. But what you'll notice from the map, so Portland will be kind of this way, Bangor is going to be up sort of this direction. What you'll see is Acadia is really divided into three main sections. There's the main section, which is Mount Desert Island right in here. Locals, it's spelled desert. Locals like to call it Mount Dessert, like pie, like the dessert that you would eat after dinner or maybe even for breakfast. But you won't get voted off the island if you call it desert, like the land we have in Arizona. So, but we call it Mount Desert Island, or MDI for short. This is where the majority of the tourists, the majority of the visitors are going to spend their time is on MDI. We also have Scudic Peninsula, and it is said that only about 10% of the visitors to Acadia actually make it to the Scudic Peninsula. It's the only section of the park that is on the mainland. It's attached to actual land. Everything else is an island. And then the third major area, we call that this is kind of the wild side, and not because there's a lot of parties, but because it's a really remote section of the park. It's called Isla Ho, High Island, and it requires a mailboat ferry to get there. So it takes a little bit more effort to get out there, but it is quite pristine. It is quite beautiful. So you kind of have three different options. There are some other smaller outlying islands like Bar Island, a couple of the Porcupine Islands, Baker Island, things like that. But the majority of the tourists are going to be really focused on MDI. And when we talk about photographing fall colors, that's where we're going to be focusing most of our efforts today. And so Acadia happens to be one of the smaller national parks at just 49,000 acres. But the interesting thing about Acadia, well, one of the many interesting things about Acadia is that it's not like some of the other parks you think of, like Grand Canyon or Yosemite, where you drive up to a park entrance gate, you pay your fee, and you go behind a gate, and the park land is in front of you. And in Acadia, the establishment of the park was really different. It was created almost entirely from donated lands. And so it's really a patchwork quilt. It's integrated with the surrounding community. And so you'll be driving, maybe on Route 3, you'll be driving, and it may not be clear whether you're on park land or private land. And so I'm going to share some maps here. It's a really good idea to get yourself a nice map. Navigating on the island is a little bit tricky. It took me about 2 or 3 years to figure it out without a map. There's some one ways and whatnot, but once you get kind of a hang of it, the island is rich with so many opportunities. So in terms of how Acadia got started, this area has been around for a really long time. Obviously, the glaciers had an impact in the Ice Age. But before really the 1600s, the Wabanaki Indians, they called this their home. And so when we visit Acadia, we're visiting the ancestral homelands of the Wabanaki Indians. And they were referred to as people of the dawn, or Pematic. They referred to Mountain Desert Island as Pematic, I'm sorry. And Pematic is really sloping island, and we don't call MDI Pematic anymore, but we do have a Pematic mountain in the park itself. Now, beginning in the early 1600s, more explorers were starting to visit the area, specifically the French, people like Samuel Champlain, Anton, I can't pronounce this, Anton de la Monte Cadillac, maybe that, I don't have a French accent. But Cadillac actually was exploring a fair bit of North America at that time. He ended up founding Detroit. So if you have ever heard of the vehicle, the Cadillac, he's named for the car is named after him. And so Champlain actually called this the island Isle des Monts Desert, island of the desert mountain, which is probably where Mount Desert Island comes from. So around the 1800s, more European, more settlers, more visitors were starting to visit the area. It was still relatively pristine and untouched. The Hudson River School painters, people like Thomas Cole and Frederick Church, started painting there right around the 1840s. And by 1850s, they were starting to show their paintings to people in Philadelphia, Boston, New York City, and people were starting to get really excited about these idyllic meadows and these craggy coastlines and these fantastic panoramic views. And so wealthy businessmen like the Rockefellers, Fords, Vanderbilts, etc., they started coming to Acadia, the land that we now know as Acadia, to summer. They were called rusticators, and they built cottages, which is code for gigantic 8-10 bedroom mansions on the island. And so this kind of became a bit of a playground for not just the rich, but for others as well. And so right around the turn of the century, these prominent people were really concerned that the island was going to get overrun. Imagine what they'd think now. But people like Charles Eliot, who was the president of Harvard at the time, met an individual named George B. Dorr, who was a preservationist. They decided that they were going to start collecting donated lands. And so they started kind of going around for the purpose of preserving the island. And by 1916, they had gathered about 6,000 acres. And so President Woodrow Wilson declared the Sur-de-Monts National Monument. And in 1919, the park got redesignated and renamed to Lafayette National Monument. And when that designated happened, it was the first national park established of the east of the Mississippi. It was the first to be created exclusively from donated lands. And the park superintendent was, not surprisingly, none other than George B. Dorr, who is known today as the founder of Acadia. In 1929, and this is kind of a funny part of history, in 1929, the park was going to acquire a good chunk of lands that we now know as part of the Schoodic section of Acadia. And the owners, the Moore family, the Moore heirs, made two demands before they were willing to transfer this land to the park. And the first was that it would remain a public park and that it would promote scientific research. The second part of this was that the park should be named to something less French. And and it cracks me up how they came up with Acadia. I'm not sure, but they did. And so in 1920, those lands were acquired by the National Park System and gifted to Acadia. So there are disputes where Acadia came from. It may not have been French. It may have come from the Arcadia region in Greece. Maybe the R got dropped out of, the word at some point. A lot of people sometimes even still today call it Arcadia. There is no R, it's just simply Acadia. More likely it's probably it probably comes from an adoption of an old town in Quebec, Canada, which was La Acadie. It's possible that that's a French interpretation of a Wapanaki word meaning the place. There's also rumors that the first settlers to MDI may have translated this term to heaven on earth. And that's what I've come to know it as, is heaven on earth. And I first applied sight unseen to the Artist in Residence program in Acadia National Park back in 2008. was really an escape for me. I was not connecting well with the Arizona desert. I needed dessert. That's what I needed. Instead of a desert, I needed dessert, Mount Desert Island. And I just needed a creative jolt, and boy, did I get it. So I spent 3 weeks in November 2009, 3 weeks in October of 2010, 4 weeks in January and February 2013. They couldn't get rid of me. I loved it so much. I've now have countless personal trips, workshops. I've now spent close to 500 days in the park, and it really feels like a second home to me. I've made so many great, remarkable memories there, and I love helping others make their own history and they're in this magical place too. So that's what we're going to do today, is help you make your own history in this beautiful, beautiful place. All right, so there is absolutely no bad time to be in Acadia. So anytime you can get there, and I mean even in winter, I love winter. But if you have not experienced Acadia in fall, it is absolutely worth your time, money, and effort to get there. Generally speaking, fall colors start in Maine in late September, and some of you might be getting some of the notifications there. The state of Maine puts out a fall foliage report. It starts a little bit early. On the coast, though, generally we start to see a bit of color late September into early October, all the way through early November. The peak is generally around mid-October, somewhere around the 14th-ish. I've seen it as early as the 9th. I've seen it as late as the 22nd. So it really depends. But you're not going to be disappointed. There is so much to see in Acadia that is unrelated to fall colors that you could be successful even without colors. I came back to Acadia. I spent 3 weeks in November, and I thought it was heaven on earth. I came back. So Acadia would have fall color anyway. In that sort of ecosystem, there are deciduous trees, but there's something that really encouraged a lot of regrowth, a lot of deciduous trees like birch, maples, and oaks. And that's the Great Fire of 1947, which is what this map is on the right-hand side here. It started kind of right outside of Bar Harbor, to the north of Bar Harbor on the island, and spread into the island. Let me get my little annotate tool here. I gotta get my drawing. It started out in this area here. Bar Harbor is here, and it spread across the eastern flank of MDI. And so there has been a lot of regrowth in those areas. And as you'll see, as we start to talk about some specific locations, a lot of the locations that I'm going to talk about are in kind of that regrowth zone. And so when it comes to, leaf peeping, leaf chasing, you absolutely want to make your reservations, make your plans early. This is a very, very popular event. This is a popular thing in Bar Harbor. And so if you're planning to stay in Bar Harbor, even Ellsworth, you want to make your lodging reservations at least a year in advance. You can probably get a little bit lucky 6 months in advance, but if you're really serious about it and have very specific things that you want to places you want to stay, you absolutely want to get in on that early. I've had to, for my workshops, go almost 2 years in advance in terms of booking hotels. That said, attractions and services are going to start closing for the season towards the end, mid-October and towards the end of October and into November. Bar Harbor is, the island is inhabited by thousands of locals. And so not everything closes down, but a fair amount of the tourist services will start to close for the season. And my favorite thing about photographing in October and the fall is that the weather can't make up its mind. And as us photographers know, that just means fleeting light. That means it could be, summer, spring, fall, and winter all in the same day, sometimes in the, 5 minutes. And so I love the fleeting light. It offers so many different spontaneous opportunities for great, awesome photography. With scheduling your trip, you've got to be careful with timing it with peak color, but making sure that a storm like a hurricane or a nor'easter doesn't come in and blow all the leaves off of the trees. And I've seen that happen. Friday, all the leaves are on the trees. Friday night, a storm comes through, and Saturday, all the leaves are on the ground. But that just means our photographic opportunities change. And it just, this glorious palette of this blanket of leaves on the ground is absolutely spectacular to photograph nonetheless. The thing that we watch out for, the thing that I'm looking at Weather for is one, what to wear. I always go, whether it's rain, fog, sun, I'm what to wear. And then the second part is there going to be a freeze? An overnight freeze can stop the development of the color entirely. It, kills the process. And so if you're on your weather app and you see, 32 degrees or colder, you want to get out to Acadia as soon as you possibly can, because those leaves are going to brown and fall off very, very quickly. So that's kind of the story with logistical stuff. When we start getting into location specifics, I could have made this presentation super short, which is to pack everything you have, bring everything you can, stay as long as you can, take your lens cap off your camera, turn your camera on and point it. Like, you'll make a great photograph when you're in Acadia. The long of it is that there are so many places in Acadia, not just on MDI, but Schoodic and Idaho and elsewhere. Even 500 days in the park since 2009 has not been enough time for me. So get yourself to Acadia and spend as much as time possible. The first place that I want to feature is Sur de Mons. It is, for those of you who have the Photographing Acadia guidebook, first of all, thank you. I'm going to be putting page numbers from the second edition up at the top, so that if you would like to follow along, you can. So I'm going to start our fall adventure in Acadia in the Sur de Mons area. Just for reference, here's Bar Harbor. This is where most of the people will have hotels and lodging. Not everybody, but that's kind of the main, kind of base of operations. And Sur de Mons is kind of right just next door. It's a very, very short drive from Bar Harbor to get there. And Sur de Mons is, as I mentioned, is the donated lands. This is the heart of Acadia. This is where it all started. And so this is a great place for us to start our fall colored journey. This is the original land that comprised Sur de Mons National Monument in 1916. And there is loads to photograph there. Before you set out on your journey, go ahead and stop by some of the historical sites. There's Sur de Mons Springs, which is kind of a little octagonal building. I don't know that I would say that it's overly photogenic, but it is really interesting to see the spring. This photograph was made, there's a little pond just to the left of it, to the east of the pond, or of the spring. And it usually has some pretty interesting reflections, some leaves kind of floating by. It's kind of interesting. There's the Wild Gardens of Acadia, which I love going through there for identification purposes. If I see something that I don't know what it is, whether that's a leaf or a wildflower, I love going to Wild Garden of Acadia. They have all the different ecosystems out there in Acadia, in this area, and they have most of the things labeled, which is very convenient. I love just going and taking a photograph of the label so I know how to label my photographs later. There's also the Dorr Monument, which is a tribute to George B. Dorr, the Nature Center, the Abbey Museum. There's plenty of things to do if you're just not feeling photographically. But if you are feeling photographic, there is so much here. All weather conditions, and you can shoot this all day. I personally prefer the morning, and that's because morning usually has directional light, even in overcast situations, sunny conditions, it has directional light. As the sun gets higher in the sky and it becomes more late afternoon, the sun starts poking behind Door Mountain and it kind of disappears. So you get a nice even illumination, you get shadow in the area, but it's not as directional as you would see it in the morning. So I personally prefer it in the morning, but all day is going to be amazing. So you'll definitely want to bring all your lenses, from wide angle to telephoto to macro. Like I said, just bring it all. You'll especially want to bring polarizers and neutral density filters, and I'm going to talk about both of these in a little bit later in the presentation. But neutral density filters are especially helpful in sunny, bright conditions if you would like to try some intentional camera movement. This is a forest scene. It's beautiful. You can do a lot of creative, impressionistic renditions of this area using slower shutter speeds and using neutral density filters. But I'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. From the Soudermonts area, you have access to multiple trails. Most of them are easy. If you're feeling spry, you can climb Door Mountain. It is a ladder trail, so it is a bit more challenging. It is exactly what you think it is when you hear the word ladder. You have to climb ladders for part of the hike up. And so most of what we do is just around Soudermonts area, and specifically we're looking at the Jessup Path. And what I love about the Jessup Path is that it is your opportunity to see the pre and post 1947 fire foliage. On the left side, when you go down the boardwalk, and I'll show you a picture of the boardwalk here in a couple of slides, when you walk down the boardwalk of Jessup Path, on the left-hand side is the old growth hemlock forest. That is the original growth before the 1947 fire. And what you see here is on the right-hand side, it's kind of a little bit more of an open meadow. We've got beech, we've got birch, we've got maple. We have other deciduous trees, sedges and grasses, ferns that are growing in this area. And that is all a result of that great fire of 1947. Now, the Jessup Path is very easy. You can go as far as you want or not as far as you want. You don't have to go very far at all. If you go a quarter mile, you can go a couple hundred yards, and it's just amazing. It is flat. Most of it is on the boardwalk. And the rangers do ask that you stay on the boardwalk when you're in this environment, as it is a fragile environment, it is still regrowing. And so we absolutely want, as photographers, to not venture into this area. And it does look like there is a path here that is obviously not mine, but we definitely want to stay on the boardwalk. That could be some deer path as well, but we definitely want to stay on the boardwalk. We also want to share the space when we're on Jessup Path. It is a narrow walkway, and if you have tripods and bags, just make sure you're being conscientious of those for other visitors, so they too can enjoy this beautiful hike, this beautiful walk. So the other part in Soudermont area that is one of my favorite places to photograph in the park is the Soudermont parking lot. I'm not kidding. It's amazing. Obviously, you want to watch out for cars. They're not expecting a bunch of photographers with tripods to be standing in the middle of the parking lot. And so be aware of your surroundings, maybe stand off to the side, in the grass or behind your vehicle or off on the sidewalk. But the Soudermont parking lot is just rich with fall color opportunities. I like a little bit longer lenses to isolate vignettes, smaller details, and that's mostly because a lot of what you're going to see on the Jessup Path, around the Soudermonts area, and even in the parking lot, is that there's a lot of distracting backgrounds. We see that a lot in forest scenes, right? And so how do we deal with that? Well, in this particular photograph, we called in a fog bank for Mother Nature, and she answered the call. It was spectacular. So the fog actually drowned out a lot of that busy background, a lot of that forest in the back that would otherwise be somewhat distracting. You can also look for lit subjects against dark shadowed backgrounds. You can look for tighter compositions, and that's where the longer lenses, like telephoto lenses, are a little bit more effective. Even macro lenses would be helpful in this area. And then perhaps consider using selective depth of field, using wider apertures like an f4, f5.6, 6.3, something up to f8 maybe, where you're blurring the background and you're really making your viewer focus on the things that are most important to you. And so when we're out in the field, when we're out in the Soudermont area, just be mindful that it is a busy forest scene, and those are complicated. Those are hard to work with. But if you're mindful of the background as much as you are as the foreground, I think you're going to be very successful. So one thing to think about, and here's the boardwalk of Jessup Path, and there's just remarkable opportunities all the way along here, including the path itself. Anytime we're out photographing fall color, we hope we get really rich, vibrant reds, yellows, oranges, and that's going to throw our sensor off a little bit. And so when we're out photographing fall colors, I'm trying to get the very best image I can in camera. And that means that I am monitoring my histogram after every frame that I make. And I'm not just looking at the luminosity histogram, which is the single kind of white, or maybe it's a black histogram, maybe it's proactive, or it's in your playback menu, but I am looking at the RGB, the red, green, blue channel, the RGB histograms. The luminosity histogram kind of looks like this. And it is a composite of the three color channels, red, green, and blue. And so it is a summary. It is not the full picture. It can be accurate, but sometimes it's not. In this particular frame, it looks like, if I only paid attention to my luminosity histogram, it looks like I have a nice balanced histogram, whether I'm photographing for JPEG format, which is an image format. What we're looking for JPEG is an even distribution of this shape between kind of the edges of the graph. This also looks like a fairly viable raw histogram. Now, raw is not an image file. It is not an image format. It is data. Raw is collecting as much data as it possibly can. And so it looks like I'm not blowing out any of my highlights. There's no spikes on either side of that, and it looks pretty clean. But as soon as we get into some of the detail, the summary doesn't add up quite the way we hope. And there's some balance between the reds and the greens going on that make this histogram look like it's okay. And so in fall color, generally what we see is we see the red channel blowing out. And we will read our RGB histograms exactly the same way you would read a brightness luminosity histogram. So for raw specifically, we want to expose to the right without blowing out your highlights. So in this case, we've got a red histogram touching the edge of the frame. I've probably got some blinkies going on in the back of my frame. Blinkies are indicating that no data has been collected in that exposure. And so how we solve that is we underexpose, we take away light. And we can do that through a number of different ways. If you're in manual mode, you can change your aperture, your shutter speed, your ISO. If you're an aperture, you're going to aperture or shutter speed priority, you're going a program mode, you're going to use the exposure value compensation. There's a lot of different ways to underexpose. The big message here, though, is no matter where your travels take you in fall color, watch your red channel because it can blow out. All right, so onward we go. We are headed to Cadillac Mountain next, and it is another great place. It is kind of down here next to Sourdimont. It is another fantastic place to see the impact of that 1947 fire. Again, it's kind of in that zone. It's a bit different, though, than Sourdimont. It's going to have a much more aerial perspective, a panoramic aerial perspective of a great deal of MDI. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal view. It has become remarkably more complicated to get up there. Spontaneous trips are a little bit harder to make. You know, if you're chasing weather, Cadillac Mountain now requires vehicle reservations from mid-May through mid-October. And I think this year it's the 22nd. I think it was May 24th through October 22nd was this year. But you can get reservations online. You can go onto the website and it'll tell you all about that. Some of the reservations are released a few months ahead of time. Some of them are released 2 days ahead of time. So there's a lot of different rules. I think it's like $6 per vehicle. So it's definitely worth trying for, but it is getting harder to get up there. Like I said, you're going to see panoramic views up there of foliage, of coastlines, of mountains. It's just glorious. I prefer it in sunrise, sunset, and bad weather. I'll show you in the next slide. Sunrise looking from the southeast side, looking east, northeast. This is looking almost due south out towards, this is Otter Cove. This is Otter Point out in here. And this is going to be, I'm going to talk about Gorham Mountain next. Gorham Mountain's kind of out in this direction. And so you have just this beautiful, beautiful view from up there. It also is a fragile environment like the Sourdimont area. And so you'll want to stay on pass, or you can rock hop on the granite. That's fine. Just don't step It's just absolutely beautiful up there. Bring all your lenses, wide angles, telephotos, macro. I mean, it's just, you've got an opportunity to get up there, use all your lenses, tell a great story while you're up there. Polarizers and graduated neutral density filters will also help. So in this case, I just used a multiple image. I did a 2-image blend so that I had a little bit more exposure in the sky and I had good exposure in the foreground. But like I said, I'm going to cover polarizers and graduated and neutral density filters in just a bit here. All right, so you're not going to have a lot of say over what the weather's doing during your visit because of this reservation system, but don't fear bad weather. If you have a reservation and it's raining or it's foggy, go anyway. Sometimes what's happening at the summit is not what's happening at the coastline. And so, I mean, the weather changes substantially. It's about a 1,500-foot elevation change. And so sometimes it can be foggy on the coast. You go up to the top and everything is below you and it's sunny and beautiful. Sometimes it's horizontal rain, and that's fun too. So just be prepared, dress yourself and get your camera gear protected, stay dry, dress for rain, even if it's foggy, and keep your camera lens tilted down and covered until you're ready situation. I'll sometimes compose through a shower cap or a clear rain cover, try to dial in my manual focus, try to get my composition set up, then take the cap off, shoot, and then protect my lens once again. And that just minimizes, the exposure to raindrops and things like that. Obviously, having lens cloth and hand towels on hand will also be helpful and make your visit up there a little bit more enjoyable. The other thing that you can do with shower cap is I have come to know it as my ethereal filter. One time when I was in Acadia, I was photographing in the rain and I made an exposure through the shower cap on accident. I cursed myself, of course, right? Because darn it got in the way. And then I looked at the back of my LCD and I was like, ooh, I kind of like that. And so now my shower cap is what I call my ethereal filter. So have an ethereal filter on hand when you come to Acadia for fall. All right, if you cannot get to Cadillac Mountain, that's okay. There's another option. The alternative, my favorite alternative, is a place called Gorham Mountain, and it is on the coastline. So here's Cadillac Mountain. It's a little bit further out here on the coast, on the far eastern, southeastern side here of MDI. And I mentioned, I can't cover it all, but if you want a great morning location to photograph anywhere along Ocean Drive, that coast is fantastic. But if you're looking for mountain views, an alternative to Cadillac Mountain, Gorham Mountain is the place to go. It takes a little bit more effort. It's not as roadkill photography as we'd call Cadillac Mountain. It requires about almost a mile one-way uphill hike. So you're going to be going up some stairs, but you'll be rewarded for your efforts with spectacular views of the Beehive. We've got Sand Beach here. We've got Great Head here. We've got Frenchman Bay back in here. We even have behind here, we've got the Schoodic Peninsula, that's Schoodic Head there. So you have beautiful views, very, very similar to Cadillac Mountain. It's not quite as high as Cadillac Mountain, but you still get beautiful views. And what I love is that you can see all of this foliage right at the base of the Cadillac Cliffs coming down to right in here is Ocean Drive. And so you have this beautiful mix of aerial perspective with fall colors, with the sunrise. Now, if you have never been to Gorham Mountain, I do not recommend that you go hike up Gorham Mountain in the dark if you've never been there before. So definitely scout the trail before you shoot it. Maybe the day before, maybe the day before, go midday and just kind of get your bearings, look for the blue blazes, look for the turns in the trail, and use a flashlight and a headlamp when you get there, and for sunrise. You'll want to bring wide angle and telephoto lenses. This is a wide angle lens. Telephoto will just get you into this beautiful foliage a little bit tighter. So there's opportunities both that way. What I like about photographing from aerial perspectives like Cadillac Mountain, like Gorham Mountain, is that we have the ability to do forced perspective. We have the ability to put some foreground really close in the foreground, really tight to our lens, maybe a 6 inches to, maybe a foot, using a wide angle lens, getting low to the ground, and really emphasizing the different layers in the scene. And so in this case, we've got layer, 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 all the way back. And so it has the illusion of depth when we don't get a lot of depth out of our two-dimensional media. And so forced perspective is just using a wide angle lens, getting low and tilting your camera down a bit. Now, if Gorham Mountain doesn't sound really all that exciting for you, if you're not up for the 1 mile hike in the dark before sunrise, the alternative is to go to the south end of Monument Cove. You can park in the same parking lot as Gorham Mountain. It's out of frame over here, but just cross Ocean Drive. It's really easy to get to Monument Cove. Go to the south end. And what happens at the south end is you get this perspective from the coastline of all of this fall color. You do get a view of the beehive. You don't quite get the view of Sand Beach. It's kind of tucked in there a little bit, but it is one of the best places. Monument Cove is one of the best places to photograph foliage along the coastline. A lot of the coastline is very rocky, which is amazing. But if you're looking for fall color and you're looking for an alternative in the morning, heading to the south end of Monument Cove is a good plan. All right, so we talked about bringing graduated neutral density filters, balancing exposure. And when we're talking about grand landscape, we're generally going to have a very broad dynamic range that we're dealing with, so broad that our camera can't actually contain it within one frame. And so graduated neutral density filters help reduce that light, that contrast and exposure across part of the frame. And they come in 1 to 4 stops of strength, and they have hard or soft gradations. My go-to are really a 3 and a 4 stop soft. The soft gradation gives me a little bit more leeway on placing it in places like trees. I did with a hard gradation, you have to be really, really, really precise. The soft gradation is a little bit more forgiving, and that's what I need. I need forgiving. And so there, I've come to just know that almost in every sunrise or sunset, I'm using a 3 or a 4 stop graduated neutral density filter to hold back light over the sky. And you can see the difference here between without a filter and with a 4 stop soft graduated neutral density filter. This is actually out in the Scudic Peninsula. You can do all sorts of math, like you can put your camera on spot meter and measure for the dark area down here, measure for the light up here, calculate the difference, and that's your required strength. But math is hard. And so I just prefer to pull out my 3, 4, and I watch my histogram. I make sure that I have the data that I need, nothing is blinking. And then I also consider where I want my visual weight within the photograph. And when we talk about human perceptions and Gestalt psychology, where visual weight happens in the frame changes its meaning. And so when we have heavier visual weight like we have here, this is a lot brighter, this is lighter, this is darker, this is going to render a much more peaceful scenario. Obviously, this is not going to work because we've got areas that are blown out, so I'd want a little bit more detail in the sky. But you can darken the sky so much that you create an anomaly where the darker end is here, the darker parts are here, and the lighter parts are here. And that creates more downward energy. Things that are dark and heavy tend to fall in terms of gravity. And so we tend to get more energy in the same frame. So I will pay attention to that. Whether I want super angry clouds, I'll use a 4 stop, or if I just want a little bit, just a little bit of detail in the data, I'll use a 2 or a 3 stop. So that's kind of the deal with graduated neutral density filters. You'll definitely want those when you're photographing broad landscape photographs. But now we're going to turn to some of our water-based locations where we can photograph not only fall colors, but fall colors reflecting in water. And so I don't care where you have photographed in the park in the morning for sunrise. At about an hour after sunrise, you'll want to make your way to the Tarn. And the Tarn is this completely random, super small, shallow pool that most people just pass right by on Route 3. I mean, they look at it, it's beautiful. It's right at the base of Door Mountain. But it becomes pure magic about an hour after sunrise. What happens is we've got this mountain back behind us. The sun has to come up and over the mountain. Door Mountain, if you can imagine, is kind of behind here. And the sun rises and hits Door Mountain, which then reflects into the shadow area of the pond. And that shadow on the water lasts for about about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I like starting at the end of the parking lot and kind of working my way towards the middle of the pond. You can get about 2 hours out of it if you're watching the light before the pond gets direct light on it. So we're photographing reflected light in this case. All of these rushes, these are all in shadow. The yellow that you see here is reflected light from Door Mountain. And so I prefer, it's got to be sunny for this to happen, right? Of course. So if it's sunny right after sunrise, I generally prefer windless conditions or even just a little slight breeze. You can see the little slight breeze. It makes it a little less of a mirror and a little bit more impressionistic, a little bit Monet-esque. This is what we would call roadkill photography. There's a parking lot. You're going to be standing right on the side of the road. So be careful with the cars. But yeah, it's a really nice place to use longer lenses to isolate different compositions within this particular pond. And with the Tarn, keep it simple. There's a bit of foliage growing right along the road that isn't particularly photogenic, and it's not really a great part of this idea of photographing reflected light. And so you might have to raise your tripod to get a little bit higher to get kind of up and over that. But the Tarn is amazing. About an hour after sunrise. If it is cloudy, I'll go to a place called Duck Brook, which is again just kind of outside of Bar Harbor. Duck Brook is this beautiful flowy brook. It's got cascades. It's got a series of cascades flowing beneath Duck Brook Bridge. You can photograph it pretty much any time of day. I prefer morning and evenings. I like it in overcast conditions. There's a short walk down some stairs or rocks to get to the water level. You can shoot it from the bridge just with a little bit longer lens. I prefer wider angle lenses and normal lenses here, a little bit slower shutter speeds. There's an eddy that happens. This swirl is because of an eddy coming off of these cascades. And a polarizer and a neutral density filter will help you slow down the water when you're in places like Duck Brook. I'll get to that in a second. Jordan Stream and Jordan Pond are other opportunities. Jordan Stream is going to be similar to Duck Brook. It's going to be a little bit further inland in the heart of Mount Desert Island, or at least on the east side here. And so there's Jordan Stream, Jordan Pond. You can park in the parking lot and get to both of the areas at the same time. So I like to start with Jordan Stream, especially if it's overcast. It's a meandering stream with multiple cascades. The flow is somewhat regulated by a little retention dam right off of Jordan Pond. So it sometimes doesn't have quite the flow of Duck Brook, but it absolutely has plenty of photographic opportunities. You don't have to walk very far. It's no more than about a quarter mile from Jordan Pond. If you want to go to Acadia's first carriage road bridge, the first one ever built, you can go to Cobblestone Bridge with about another quarter mile down the path. But I like a little bit longer lenses in this area. We've got some polarizers, things like that, to help really dial in our shutter speeds, balancing that with reflected light. And I'm going to talk about that tip in just a slide here after I talk about Jordan Pond. Jordan Pond has endless photographic opportunities as well. There's color pretty much once you get down to the pond, it's pretty much everywhere. So bring all of your lenses, go in all weather conditions. I prefer late afternoon through sunset, just because of the direction of the light. This is a sunset photograph. This is in civil twilight, so it's a little bit after sunset. I like really photographing this little flank over here. Out of sight, there's another flank over here, which is another cove area, which is absolutely beautiful. But anywhere you walk on the southern end of the shoreline, you're going to get a fantastic view of none other than one of my favorite mountains, the bubbles. The bubbles. And so you just walk anywhere along the southern edge of the shoreline, and you'll be successful in terms of finding fall photographic opportunities. Now, one thing to note, and this is kind of true for a lot of places within within Acadia, is that Jordan Pond is a public water supply. So you can't actually wade in the water to make your photographs. So no swimming, no wading, just stay on the rocks and stay on the shoreline. So when we talk about photographing fall reflections, when we're talking about water, the beautiful light, the beautiful color reflecting into the water, a couple of tips is know what you're going for before you photograph it. When we have moving water, sometimes we want a little bit slower shutter speed to show a little bit of movement. With reflection, sometimes we want a little faster to freeze the motion. The easiest thing to do is, as you're standing along the brook, along the stream, is to ask yourself what you're responding to. Are you feeling like it's flowing? Then that would be a slower shutter speed. Are you feeling like you love the structure of the ripples and the way that the movement of the water is happening? Then you probably want a little bit faster shutter speed. And so using your words, if you title your photograph before you make it, that can help. This one is called Bubblelicious because it reminded me, of course it's bubbles, but it also reminded me of Bubblelicious gum with that pink. This is all reflected light. The blue is reflected light from the sky. In this case, I didn't use a polarizer because I wanted to emphasize the color of the water, the reflection in the water. And so when you're getting a little bit tighter, isolate your structure and lines, shapes, colors, and tones, things like that, and add a contrasting visual interest, something like a leaf floating by. In this case, this is bubbles. Life is better with bubbles, right? So add something that gives it a little bit more visual interest than just the flat surface of the water, although that can be equally as beautiful as well. So just some things to think about when you're photographing reflections. You have to be careful with a polarizer. Sometimes you want the reflection, sometimes you don't. Polarizer filters filter out reflected light. Its maximum effectiveness, the filter's maximum effectiveness, is at 90 degrees from the sun if the sun is out. You'll want to turn your polarizer when it's attached to your camera. Keep turning it to the left, counterclockwise. Don't turn it to the right. You'll turn it right off your lens, which I've done before. But you'll either enhance or you'll eliminate the reflection. And it's kind of salt and pepper to taste. Like in this case, what you see here on the top of the surface is the reflected cloud. And so to get rid of that, you would polarize. You turn your polarizer and you can start to see under the water. You can see a little bit more color saturation in the trees. Is that what you want? Maybe, maybe not. It just kind of depends. You can go in between the two by simply turning the polarizer a little bit less or a little bit more. And so you have some good power, some good control. A polarizer can also reduce glare and specular highlights off of leaves and trees. So it's really, really great to use around rocks, water, leaves. Everything looks more saturated. And with fall color, that's helpful. All right, so when you're using a polarizer, though, you want to be cautious about some of the unsightly effects. If you're not paying attention, if you're paying attention, polarizers are amazing, but you just have to be watching that your polarizer is going to reduce light by about 1 to 2 stops of light. Singh-Ray actually has a lighter, brighter filter that is 2/3 faster than most of the polarizers out there, and so really appreciate that, especially if it's windy. It's never windy when you're photographing leaves and trees, is it? Of course not. But if you're photographing water, a polarizer can help slow that water down. It's really, really helpful. It can act as a neutral density filter in a pinch. But you also want to watch for uneven polarization and vignetting, especially with wide angle lenses. You can get a thin ring mount, which Singh-Ray also has. That's what I have. You can use a square polarizer if you have a wide angle lens wider than 24 millimeter. If you have a bulbous lens, I have bulbous lenses for my wide angle, so I need to use a square polarizer with a separate filter holder. And or you can buy a bigger diameter polarizer and use a step-up ring and attach to your lens, which I also have for one of my lenses. And so the uneven polarization is what you see here. You see that this blue is a lighter blue than this. This is where the polarizer is most effective, 90 degrees from the sun. And so this is sort of a natural gradation, but if I were using a polarizer, I'd want to dial that back just a little bit. The other thing, and I didn't have a good example in full color with Acadia, is vignetting, where the edges of your corners will be black. And that's just your perspective is too wide. It's clipping the edges of the filter. So those are just a couple of things to look out for, but very, very helpful. All right, so we're in the home stretch here. Upper Hadlock Pond is also water. It's a little bit outside of that 1947 area, but it still has remarkable fall color. I like it not for the water necessarily, although there are some great opportunities, but I love that this whole hillside, this west-facing flank of Cedar Swamp Mountain is just full, it's just a kaleidoscope in color. And so I prefer overcast conditions. Generally in the afternoon, kind of late afternoon, maybe even towards evening, sunset. It's what I would call roadkill photography, where you park your car and you just kind of get out and shoot. You can do a short walk along the western shore. I just like a little bit longer lenses to isolate. This is actually a little bit longer lens. This is a 90 millimeter, or for my camera, my Olympus, which is a mirrorless, it has a 2x factor. So this is actually 180 millimeter range telephoto for my lens. And so polarizers and graduated neutral density filters are going to help. Polarizers are obviously going to help with that glare off of the leaves here. But graduated neutral density filter will hold back light over things like fog or a brighter sky, so that you can render the entire frame in good exposure. The next stop is Eagle Lake. Eagle Lake is also obviously full of rich water opportunities. It's a very, very large lake with views of Cadillac, Pemmitic, Sargent Mountains, and of course the bubbles. I prefer late afternoon and sunset, but early mornings there are fantastic. All light here is going to be workable. You don't have to go very far. It's about a half a mile in either direction of the boat ramp to get to beautiful, beautiful fall color. We've got Cadillac Mountain kind of in the background here, so you can see all that fall color. It's really great with longer lenses, but you can also use wide angle lenses. And one of the things that you have to be careful with in all of Acadia's water, all of their lakes, their ponds, is proximity. Make sure you're being mindful of your midground. The distance between the foreground and the background can kind of be too much. It can be too much of a jump for your viewer to make. And so you want to squat down just a little bit lower so that we have a little bit more closer relationship proximity between our foreground and our midground. Otherwise, sometimes we can get a lot of just open space, open water, which may be great if there's a reflection, but if it's just open water, it can be a little bit unsightly. Watch for bikers when you're out there. Just watch your bags, make sure you're being mindful of where you put your stuff. And then like Jordan Pond, it's a public water supply. So no swimming, sorry, leave your swimsuit at home. All right,
Along
so
the lines of watching out for others, we did have a question. Do you have any suggestions for avoiding the crows of photographers and people there for fall foliage?
yeah, so I mean, you're going to be sharing the space with a lot of not just photographers, but you're going to be sharing the space with visitors. There is plenty. If you go about a quarter mile away from the trailhead, you're going to probably find some peace and solitude. So I would recommend just walking a little bit further. There are so many trails and so many paths. I can tell you people are, the normal tourist isn't going to be at the top of Gorham Mountain, for example. And so just getting a little bit further away from the overlooks, a little bit further down the trail will help with that. But you can expect people and you just have to be okay with it. And what I like to tell my workshop participants is they made the clone stamp for a reason in Photoshop. People are usually quite small, and so you can eliminate them if they get into your frame. It's just about having patience and sharing the space. It's a reality, unfortunately. So yeah. So when I'm in Eagle Lake, I'm in different forest scenes, and this could be in pond situations, this could be on carriage roads, this could be anywhere. I like to try intentional camera movement. And what that means is that we're moving the camera during the exposure, up and down, side to side, around in a circle, tracing, the first letter of your name. It could be a zoom pull. It's any movement whatsoever. And you don't want to use a tripod because you want to physically move the camera during the exposure. We're going to start around about 1/8 of a second. You can go as slow as a second, maybe even 2. You want to experiment with this, try this. If you're in the middle of the day and you're feeling like an intentional camera movement coming on, you might apply a neutral density filter. It will help reduce the light. It will help you go from this is a static, all in focus, frame, to when we move the camera, we can make photographs more like this, much more impressionistic. This is the same exact scene in the same exact light. So very, very, very different feel. And I like intentional camera movement to help express the movement of the wind. If you've got a lot of wind and you're not getting things in focus, using intentional camera movement can be a lot of fun. Just adding to your portfolio. It's a really fun way to interpret the landscape around you. So try intentional camera movement. If you're out in forest scenes, there's a lot of great structure. There's a lot of great color contrast that really make these really effective. All right, so our final location is actually not in the park, but it is one of the most idyllic places in the entire island. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention Little Long Pond, which is out here in this area. The land actually is next to Acadia. So in this photograph, you're actually seeing Acadia right in here. But the land itself is an old historic Rockefeller property that was donated and now managed by donated to and is now managed by the Land and Garden Preserve of MDI. I love this location. This is one of the Rockefeller boathouses. I love this location at sunrise. This is sunrise here in this photograph, but sunset is equally as effective. And you can see, you can just imagine, there's wide angle views from back a little bit along the trail. You can go and stand in the boathouse and photograph all of this magic here, all of this magic here, all of this magic here. It's just everywhere. And so bring all your lenses. You're not going to have to go very far, very short stroll, fairly flat area along either shoreline. Polarizers, graduated neutral density filters are absolutely a necessity in this location. Keep your bag zipped up. This area is very popular with dog walkers. They are usually all very, very well behaved, but occasionally you'll get one that's just happy to see you and is curious and may want to see what a polarizer tastes like. So keep your bag zipped up. But just be mindful of the dogs out there. Don't be surprised. It's not going to be a bear or anything like that. So it's just curious dogs. All right, so the final tip that I have is making sure when you go to a place like Acadia or anywhere that you photograph fall colors is telling your own individual story. And there is really a difference between a photograph of something and a photograph about something. And I have my 3 artists in residencies, all of that time there, to thank for helping me understand the difference between the two. And so to get to what is this photograph about? It's really connecting with your own individual connection with the landscape. It's the story that you're creating while you're out in the scene. And so the best questions to ask yourself are, what are you responding to and why? And then what else is it? And that starts to get into metaphorical association. Metaphorical association will start to use the things that are already in your brain and start matching them with the landscape in a new and different way. And so one of the things that was going on, this is out at Little Long Pond. I was standing in the boathouse. This is in 2019. And I saw these 2 trees and I had this whole narrative going in my head about gosh, that's curious. It's really curious. Why does this tree have almost all of its leaves on it and the tree next to it doesn't have any of its leaves? And like, what happened there to cause that? That really, it was great. I had a lot of thought. And then I was like, wow, and then, we should be choosing wisely. Like, there's this opportunity between, joy and happiness and kind of this stark, maybe not so happy, skeletal kind of thing. And so then I noticed, as I was setting up the composition, I noticed this little evergreen tree at the bottom. And I was like, okay, well, so this evergreen's going to grow up under these two trees and it's going to have to make a choice. And so I titled this Choose Wisely. And I put the evergreen tree right in the middle, right at the base of these two trees, because I wanted you to feel the juxtaposition, the pull between those two decisions. And now, do I expect my viewers to know that story, that narrative when they see this photograph? No, but I make photographs because they mean something to me first. And hopefully you'll feel that sort of tension between what's going on. And of course, once I realized that this was an evergreen and that it had to make a choice between, maybe a happy life and maybe not such a great happy life, I realized that the evergreen was never going to be a deciduous tree and it was going to grow up and do its own thing. So that's kind of the message, is grow up and do your own thing, or don't ever grow up. Tell your own story, though. I have a presentation that I actually did with Singh-Ray called Human Perceptions and Composition. It's on YouTube. It is a great presentation to help you understand how to connect verbal language with visual language to create a little bit deeper meaning. I couldn't cover it in this presentation, but there is that presentation out there. If you are interested in learning more about that, I would definitely highly recommend that. And the great thing about tapping into your individuality and your existing knowledge is that as you grow and as you expand your knowledge, your stories are going to evolve, even in the exact same locations. And so this is Choose Wisely from 2022 last year. And you can see I called this Chose Wisely. And so even after hundreds of days in the same place, as you grow and expand your knowledge of places like Acadia, as you go to different locations, whether that's Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon or wherever your travels may take you, you have the ability, you have the raw materials to bring back into these familiar locations and express them in new and different ways. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it. I've talked a little bit about gear. This is kind of a summary. When you do the playback, you can kind of use this as a checklist. We've talked about, bringing all your lenses, the different types of filters that are going to help you, your polarizer, your graduated neutral density filters, your neutral density filters, definitely a headlamp or a flashlight. Couple of things we haven't covered but are optional, like a reflector and a diffuser to manage midday light. That can be helpful. Knee pads and gardening mats. It's a lot of rock out there. So if you're concerned about your knees, definitely bring some knee pads or a gardening mat. And then a Hoodman hood loop. If it's really bright out, a Hoodman hood loop can help you kind of focus in on your LCD screen, kind of provide a shade over your LCD screen to help you to see your compositions and to see your histogram especially. So if it's raining, these are some things that you might put into your backpack. I always get ready. I always have things for rain because you just never know what the weather is going to be doing. So in addition to the backing list, these are some resources. And of course, I'm going to shameless self-promotion. I'm going to obviously recommend my guidebook, Photographing Acadia National Park, The Essential Guide to When, Where, and How. It came out with a second edition, which has a lot more of the creative aspects that I learned in between my first edition and the second edition. This is really my love letter to the park. This is the book that I wished I would have had when I was there in my artist in residency. And it is hopefully a guide that you all put to great use, get those pages worn out, to help get you in the right place at the right time to get your creative juices flowing in these different areas. For the individual who asked about avoiding the tourists, I do have in the back of the book kind of off the beaten path locations, which could be helpful if you're as not excited about going to some of the more iconic locations. And there's a lot of other different resources in terms of historical. I love The Carriage Roads of Acadia by Diana Abrell. I love Mr. Rockefeller's Roads, Acadia, the Complete Guide to Acadia National Park. And then some of the techniques I've had to go through fairly quickly today. On my Dear Bubbles column, dearbubbles.com, I have a couple of different more technical explanations of things like how to photograph fall color, how to use a polarizer, when to use a polarizer, how to use graduated neutral density filter. And then the last one that I would recommend is photographing using intentional camera movement. So those are all really great resources. I just want to take a minute to thank Singh-Ray for their support. It's one thing to make great products, but it's another thing to help support their community. And they have been remarkable in supporting not only my journey, but also my community. And I know a lot of others of you out there. They were gracious sponsors of the Photographing Acadia National Park books. They helped make that a reality. They also provide filters for use on my different workshops. So if you want to try before you buy, it's a really great way to do that. So I just want to give a shout out to Singh-Ray for their ongoing support. It's just been absolutely amazing throughout the years. So with that, here is my contact information. If you would like to learn more about my Acadia workshops, I go there generally, I go there every October, and sometimes I go in the winter and some other times, but you can jump on my website, www.colleenminiuk.com. If you have any questions, that's my email. I'm going to take questions here in a second. You can pick up the guidebooks at analemmapress.com, which is my publishing company, and the rest of the social media. Let's be friends. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and see if anybody is still awake. See if there's any questions.
Before we get to their questions, you mentioned bubbles and deer bubbles a few times. Is there a history there? Why deer bubbles?
Bubbles is one of my many nicknames, and it really evolved. Actually, it evolved from Acadia. I was on Isla Ho, what was it, in 2013, right after the government shut down. And I was photographing my mom. I was photographing along the coast. My mom and dad were with me. My mom goes, "Come here, Colleen, you got to see these. This is amazing." It was a little tide pool. And I walked over there, and I don't know, you have like one of these moments where your like head just kind of explodes. Like it just, I saw these bubbles and like universes, and like I just lost my marbles. And so I'm making all of these photographs, and my dad's sitting there watching, his two girls do their thing, getting all excited. And my dad goes, "What are you guys doing over there?" And I go, "Dad, this is the best photograph I've ever made in my life." And he goes, "Kind of, oh, come on, let me see the back of the." So I show him the back of the camera, and he just looks at it. He goes, "Oh yeah, that's the very best photograph you've ever made in your life." And so we had a really great moment. So I just got really excited about bubbles, photographing bubbles thereafter. I had the opportunity to present at the Moab Photo Symposium, and the organizer had, I believe, an aunt who his nickname was Bubbles, and he gave me the nickname Bubbles. I think probably because maybe I never get excited about anything. So, but I started Dear Bubbles right before the pandemic as kind of a what if. I had gotten a question from my community, and I was like, it'd be really funny, ha ha ha, if I was like Dear Abby, just Dear Bubbles, ha ha ha. And now it's been going for like 3 years, 4 years this fall. I did it through the pandemic once a week. I've now changed to once a month, so it comes out the first Wednesday of every month. And I love it. I get questions from the community, everybody, and we get to learn and grow together. And so that's kind of the evolution of Dear Bubbles.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
Good segue again from COVID and shutdowns. Will Acadia still be open with possible government shutdowns?
Yeah, that is the $10,000 question, isn't it? I guess we'll find out on Sunday, we'll find out on Sunday. The short answer is I don't know. The National Park Service doesn't even know. In 2013, the park completely shut down. In 2018, the park was left open. And I don't have any idea what direction we're going to go. So we're just going to have to wait. The great thing is if you do book a trip to Acadia and you have lodging in Bar Harbor, there is ample things to photograph around there. In 2013, I actually ran an autumn around Acadia workshop, and it was awesome. It was beautiful. There's plenty of fall colors all around there. So go anyway and just make the most of the hand that we're dealt. So, yeah.
Do you find the Micro Four 3 sensor gives you adequate files to make large prints? What are your biggest reasons for choosing that system?
Yeah, so I did write a Dear Bubbles about this. I initially bought into the mirrorless not to change over. I was shooting Canons at the time, a DSLR. I was changing over to mirrorless because it was lighter and easier for me to do a lot of the stand-up paddleboarding trips that I was doing. And I just loved it so much that it was like, I'll just shoot it all the time. I'm routinely published. I print 4 foot by 6 foot from the files. So I do have a dear bubbles on that. If you know how to expose, you know about how to work with raw data. The iPhones are amazing resolution these days. Our technology has just evolved so much. I have absolutely zero concern about enlargement possibilities with a mirrorless camera, especially now. I mean, my Olympus OMD, EM1 Mark II is several years old now. And so even in that time frame, the technology has changed, and it's great.
All right. Someone said it does get busy in fall, but totally worth the trip.
Yeah.
Gary wants to know, have you ever seen any bears there?
I have seen the butt and the back end of a bear precisely once. They're there, I'm sure of it, but it's an island, and so it's a little bit harder for them to get on the island. They do. And occasionally you'll see somebody's, in the social media forums, they'll they'll show, a bear in somebody's backyard. They're there. They're not something that I worry about tremendously.
What is your preferred backpack to carry all of your gear?
Well, it's an old Click bag that I got from Moab Photo Symposium. Click has since gone out of business, but I love this backpack so much that it's literally going to fall off of me. Like, I think I've had it for about 8 years. Just I haven't found one to replace it, and so I use my Click, but I'm still looking for something better, something different.
And for lodging, is there a base of operations that you prefer that's not as packed as Bar Harbor?
Yeah, so I now stay out. I don't stay in town anymore. I stay out a little bit on the outskirts. You could try Ellsworth. It's just you've got to balance, crowds versus, how early you want to get up for sunrise, or how late do you want to stay after sunset. So Ellsworth has cheaper lodging. All along Route 3, that Tremont area has plenty of lodging. You can stay. I'm sure there's like VRBOs and stuff in like Southwest Harbor, Northeast Harbor. There's VRBOs and Airbnbs across the island. So you could also try that to be outside of town. Bar Harbor is definitely it's a happening place for sure, but there's fantastic food and all sorts of things. So anyway.
Someone asked if the recording will be made available, and yes, everyone who registered will get a link tonight. Any suggestions for someone with limited sight?
Limited sight in terms of, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's limited vision, and this is oddly enough something I have a lot of experience with. I've worked with a lot of people with low vision, people who are blind. I know a lot of companies who make custom systems. If that is the question, and you can chime in as the resident photographer, Colleen, I'm thinking like a separate display connected to the camera where you can view your photo in a larger space.
That's a great suggestion, Michelle. A lot of the newer cameras, a lot of the newer technologies, you have the ability to connect Bluetooth wireless, and so you could actually see that on your phone. I can actually make a photograph from my phone if I want to, from the Olympus system. And like I said, my Olympus system is a bit older, so the newer technology would be amazing with that. I would think that would be a very, very great thing to do. Yeah.
I actually happen to know a blind photographer, and this is hilarious, but he is
That's
completely
amazing.
100% blind, and he'll hear things going around and know that there's an interesting picture in front of him, and it's somehow he captures these amazing photos, and he's 100% blind, and it's all iPhone photos, but it's fascinating.
I would love to see that. That's amazing. It's a whole nother story, but I had we were rafting the Grand Canyon one year and we came up to blind kayakers. And I mean, blind kayakers in the Grand Canyon, sounds insane, but they could hear eddies. Like they could hear eddy lines. Like their senses were just on a totally different, they were calibrated totally different than anything that, people with sight have. And so that's incredible. Yeah.
Do you have a starting favorite shutter speed when you are shooting moving water?
I do. I generally shoot around 1/8 of a second. And what I'm trying to go for there is a little bit of, I want the movement, but I want to retain structure. I'm trying to avoid what I call the white blob of nothingness, where it just becomes this white spot on our photograph. I don't want it so cottony that it's, that I don't have structure and I don't have detail in that area. So generally speaking, it's 1/8 of a second. But with the eddy, for example, with Duck Brook, I like to shoot that, in between 4 and 8 seconds. It really depends on the water, and what I'm feeling at that time and how I want to express things, things like that. So I'll but generally my go-to is 1/8 of a second.
Do you recommend any specific graduated filter for fall? There are many kinds on the website.
So, I mean, graduated neutral density filters, for fall, for any time, not just fall, I would say just in general, if you're just getting started out, I would recommend a 3-stop soft. It'll be forgiving, it'll be powerful enough, but not so overpowering. Like I said, my go-to is a 3 and a 4-stop, and I'm not afraid to stack them if I'm shooting into backlit situations. But generally, for those who are getting started, a 3-stop soft graduated neutral density filter, the Galen Rowell line that you guys carry is my favorite. So.
And then Gary Vargo, longtime listener, he's here every month. I know you, Gary. He also happens to be a past Singh-Ray presenter.
Whoop,
He
whoop.
wants to know, if you didn't have Olympus, what would you go with?
If I knew the answer to that, I might be with them. I don't know. I absolutely love my Olympus. At the time, I was shooting Canon, but Canon and Nikon didn't really have mirrorless options at the time. But I absolutely love my Olympus. And so, yeah, I don't know that I would go with any other right now.
You've been photographing Acadia for many years and it's beautiful, but what about it keeps you inspired to return every year?
I think first, it's the beauty. I mean, I have such a deep emotional, personal connection with that place. And it's more than just, locations. It's more than just like Cadillac Mountain and the Tarn. I have so many memories with so many people and friends there that it is like, it's a second home. Like it is going back, and it's just a very comforting place to me. I went to Acadia at a time in my journey where I was not really I was photographing landscape photography, but I really wasn't super comfortable with the outdoors. And Acadia was so accessible and it was so welcoming that I just loved that about it. What keeps me going back after 500 days in the park is that it's a challenge. I go back mainly to share the joy and the love. So I do a lot of workshops there. But for my own personal growth and my own personal perspective, it's always fun for me to see what stories are evolving, like Choose Wisely. Choose Wisely I was going through some heavier life stuff. And so the story changed completely, over the 3 years that it took to re-photograph that in a new and different way. And so for me, it was just, like I said, as you evolve as a human, your connections with these places are going to change. And so I have this ever evolving, ever flowing relationship with Acadia. And I can tell you that my photographs, after all of these years, after what now, 14 years, math is hard, 14 years, 2009 now. my photographs are getting better. They're getting more meaningful. They're getting richer. They are way more interesting than my first artist in residency, although that had value in it of itself. But in my case, I go back for the challenge. I go back for the discovery. There's still plenty of Acadia I haven't seen. So I always try to get in new hikes and new trails and things like that. But it's always great to see just the broader community out there enjoying this fantastic area. So that's what inspires me to keep going back.
And this seems to be a recurring question. I'm going to put a bug in the ear of the Singh-Ray folks on the line. We might need a webinar on the blue and gold polarizer, or some of the, the one meant for the night sky, like some of these off the wall ones. We get this a lot. Have you used the Singh-Ray blue and gold polarizer?
I have, and I do use it if I want to emphasize a little bit more of the gold color. I didn't use it for this. This is the tarn, because the tarn is so neon anyway. But yeah, there's some really great opportunities out there if you want to enhance kind of that color contrast. That's such a great contrast, the blue and the gold. It's the warm and kind of the cold juxtaposition, and so that introduces a little bit of visual tension, and so I think that works really well. That blue gold can really emphasize and bring out that color. So yeah.
It's really artistic filter is how
Yeah.
I see that one.
Yeah.
What, how do you know what size graduated ND filter to order?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have a little bit about that on my Dear Bubbles post, but in short, you generally want to make sure that you have a big enough graduated neutral density filter to cover the front of your lens. And so, if you've got like a 55 millimeter diameter lens, which is what I have, my 14 to 150, you don't need a super big graduated neutral density filter, but I think I have the 100, 150, 100s, which are quite large. I think they're the 4x5, 4x6, so that I can move them around across a broader diameter lens. So like my wide angle lens, I want a little bit more flexibility. So the bigger you get, the more flexibility you're going to have in placing it, whether it's tilting, moving that horizon line up and down. I would definitely not go small. I would just make sure that you understand what your the diameter of your lenses are, your broadest diameter lenses, and then try to go a little bit bigger than that, just so you have some flexibility. Yeah.
And when is the best time to go? When does color start to fade? Are there newsletters that you subscribe to so that you know ahead of time?
Yeah, there is a main fall foliage, and I should have added that, but they send an email out once a week. The color is mid-October, and every year is different. So like I said, we've had peak as early as the 9th, we've had peak as late as the 22nd. But generally, if you're kind of, in that second week, you're probably going to see some color. The first week of October is you'll see color. It's just not going to be super developed. And same thing with like the 3rd and the 4th week. You'll see color. It's just not going to be maybe not quite as many leaves on the trees, but there'll be plenty of leaves on the ground, and that's equally as exciting, as interesting, at least to me. So, you've got to time it with the freeze. You've got to time it with storms. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. So the best time to go is mid-October. But really, like I said, any time is going to be a great time to be in Acadia.
And Lisa said she lives in New Hampshire and they're predicting that fall will last a week longer than usual this year.
Yeah, I've heard similar things. They've been having that area has had I don't know about New Hampshire, but I know Maine in particular has had just a phenomenal amount of rain. They have had very warm days, and they're starting to get in that 50s, 40s time, that temperature range. We gotta watch so that we don't get a freeze. But if we don't get a freeze, we don't get any major hurricanes blowing through. I think this could be a fairly lengthy and a fairly good fall color season. But I've been going since 2010. I have never, ever, ever had a bad fall there. So it's always amazing. So
If you had to pick your top 3 filters, what would they be?
oh polarizer for sure. Polarizer. I use polarizer all the time. Thin mount. because I use it with a little wider angle lens. Thin mount, gosh, it's going to be hard between a 3-stop or a 4-stop. I think I would go with a 4-stop right now, just because I'm a little bit further down in my path and I love angry skies. I love pissed off clouds. So 4-stop, soft, graduated neutral density filter. And then I love my very ND, my 2 to 8 stop, my Singh-Ray, very ND. I love the flexibility. I have a very specific shutter speed in mind, and I can just dial that thing right in when I'm photographing movement. So those would be my 3. I have more than that in my bag, but those are the 3 that I use the most.
Do you handhold your ND filters?
Oh, who's asking? The filter
That's
police?
Susan.
Are the filter police asking? Not always. Most of the time I have a filter holder, but I am guilty. I do handhold my filters sometimes. Not my neutral density filters. My neutral density filters is to slow shutter speeds down. So I have actually tried that once with a 10-stop. I had to handhold that filter for 4 minutes. Uh-oh, my video went wild. Hang on. I had to hold that for 4 minutes, and I vowed I'd never do that again. So my graduated neutral density filters, I will handhold occasionally. But my neutral density and my polarizers are screw on. So no, I don't handhold those.
When you are out shooting on your own, how do you go about composing a photograph? How do you look at the scene? Do you stay in one place for a long time? Do you run and gun?
Yeah, that's a really long answer. And the answer is it depends. I do stay in one place probably much longer than the average photographer. I am looking to milk a scene, if you will. I am looking to maximize my connection, especially if I'm excited about it. I want to work light. I want to work compositions. I want to work ideas. And so I definitely approach. I'm not generally a run and gun kind of photographer, although that's not, I've done that before. I've chased rainbows before. So it just really depends. How do I go about composing a photograph? I don't know that we have enough time in the day to go through that. But I would definitely recommend going to that Singh-Ray presentation about human perceptions and composition. That's 40 minutes. That's an hour-long presentation about how I look at things, how I use human perceptions and not rules to compose things. So in general, really on a kind of a quick scale, I'm asking myself what I'm responding to and why. I'll title my photograph before I shoot it. I try to get some words, and then I try to match my composition to fit that, to match that meaning, so that I convey it visually. But that presentation will give you kind of all that background. It's a really long answer, I think.
And I'm not sure who they is, but do they have a magnetic system?
I know that there are some companies out there that have a magnetic, like you attach the filter via magnets, versus like screw on. I have tried those and I have not had great success. I have tried them and I have lost filters because of that. And it's not so much that the magnets are not strong enough. The magnets are. It's that I can be clumsy and I hit it. I'll hit it and it falls off. And so I'm not super excited about magnetic systems. Even they have the magnetic attachments, which is what I've used, the magnetic kind of rings that attach between your lens and the filter. I've not really had great success with that. And to be honest, at this point, it kind of scares me. So I love the screw-ons, as long as you don't screw them off.
Perfect. I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Colleen, for being with us tonight. I love hearing you talk and the storytelling way that you have to describe your journey in photography.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I hope that everybody has taken away some new ideas about photographing fall, and maybe even got inspired to photograph fall in Acadia National Park. If you are, I'll see you out there. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Woo.